Greetings, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, depending upon when you're coming into the Unizin Summit. I am Kathy O'Brien. I'm the CEO of Unizin, and it is absolutely my pleasure to welcome all of our guests to the Unizin 2022 Summit. I want to welcome in particular both members and non-members who have taken the time from their busy day because they care about student success, they care about student affordability, and they know that having learner data is a key to improving their students' rates of student success and their ability to achieve their academic dreams. Together with our vendor partners, Unizin recognizes the pivotal role that learning data can play through digital transformation and carefully studied guidance in achieving academic goals for our students. We are together all of the registrants for this summit with 62 different institutions from 7 different countries representing more than half of the 50 states. There are as many almost non-Unizin members as there are members in the room, if you will. I know there are 6 institutions that are considering membership or in the process of becoming membership. So I want to urge everyone to attend the social summit this evening and make friends and meet new people and share your experiences. It is through our sponsors that we are able for the second year in a row to offer the Unizin Summit entirely free. And it is through the willingness and the efforts of our members who are presenting 31 different presentations, and that takes almost 70 people to do that. In particular, I want to thank our premier sponsor, Instructure, who makes this event possible. Instructure and Unizin have been partners since the very beginning of Unizin, low on to 8 years ago. And they have provided our members with an open, reliable, extensible learning ecosystem, a digital environment where educators, students, and institutions come together to achieve their goals. The platform is made up of several key pillars, such as learning management, assessment, and analytics. These work together to enrich and support and connect every aspect of teaching and learning. Instructure continues again to be our key sponsor this year. And as a result, we have this incredible panel for you to hear from, and I'll get to that shortly. I do want to introduce our facilitator, Dr. Benjamin Motz. He's been involved in Unizin also since its inception in 2014. At the time, he was a senior lecturer and the Educational Policies Committee in the IU, Indiana University's Faculty Council, when the word Unizin was first mentioned. And since then, I guess you could say he's been a power user, a staunch supporter of Unizin services, and an advocate for what Unizin does. He has in his research a relentless appetite for data, and his scholarship is at the intersection of learning, behavior, and technology, and has provided some wonderful, groundbreaking demonstrations of what Unizin with its Unizin Data Platform can do. To name just 2, he has led the Many Classes Initiative, which he co-organized with a colleague at Ohio State, Shauna Jaggers. This was a multi-institutional study of student experience during the transition to remote learning as a result of the pandemic. He's published extensive research on how to make sense out of student learning data at scale, and he's now leading a brand new collaborative initiative called Terracotta. You can learn more about Terracotta at the second day of our summit, which is Thursday in the very first session at 12:15 Central Time. Terracotta is also a multi-institutional research study, and there'll be some invites, I know, to get involved if your institution is interested. Currently, he directs the eLearning and Research Practice Lab, and brand new, hot off the presses, as of August, he'll be an assistant professor of psychology and brain sciences at Indiana University. So before that tenure clock starts ticking, I'm excited to welcome him to the Unizin 2022 Summit. Ben, it's all yours.
Thank you so much, Kathy. I can't tell you how much I appreciate the invitation, and thank you all for coming to this panel, which I'm really excited to share with you. Really, I'm grateful to Kathy for giving me the opportunity to put together a panel that will be able to speak on the things that I hope that Unizin is able to hear. So this is a big gift to be able to share some of the things that I think are most interesting and cutting edge. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here. So let me look good. Okay, today I'm going to be making a case by making a showcase for research on improving student success. I've got some of the awesomest people that I can think of here available with me today. And yeah, I'll go ahead and get started by giving you what I believe to be, I don't know, the motivating theme behind the generation of Unizin. Now, I'm not a historian, but as Kathy mentioned before, I've been around basically since its inception. And I've read all the things that people have written about Unizin, and I've been privy to some of the things that I think Unizin has done best. So if I may boil it down to a single slide, or maybe even to a single button, Unizin's history is a story of control. Now, to understand this in context, I think it would be helpful to kind of zoom back in time to the pre-Unizin days. In fact, even before the digital transformation of higher education, and think about what teaching was like before then. So like, for example, when I was in college. When I was in college, a teacher could observe student learning by looking at their physical classroom. So there were blue books that would indicate where students would indicate their answers to questions. Teachers could see when students would finish their exams. Teachers could administer activity to their classrooms in the absence of any real technology tools to be able to support it, in the absence of even connections. And thus it was possible for a teacher to be able to observe student learning and student behaviors during the learning process in a relatively natural way. The digital transformation of higher education changed that. And in many ways, it changed it for the better. It made possible opportunities for students to connect with one another and to connect with innovative learning resources and activities. But it also meant that teachers no longer could observe student learning. In fact, it was instead the case that the person or the company that was vending the learning tool started to be able to be the observer of what students were doing. And that shifted control of our understanding of the learning process from the higher education institutions that were responsible for learning to the vended tools that made learning, that made connected learning solutions. And this was potentially problematic because the vended tools might have a conflict of interest. I'm not going to suggest that Instructure is not virtuous at its core, but nevertheless, they have other priorities potentially in addition to helping facilitate student success. So Unizin was an effort to kind of pull some of that control back. It's been realized in a variety of different ways. One is simply through being a collective rather than an individual. So sharing some of the responsibilities for understanding how student success might happen in a large educational institution. But also, and most notably nowadays, for generating a data set that institutions can use to be able to understand student learning rather than relying on vended tools to be able to provide that understanding on our behalf. And I think that at this point, the Unizin community should be standing up and like giving itself cheers and rounds of applause because the world's largest learning laboratory, the Unizin Data Platform, the UDP, actually exists. I've seen it. I've even like poked it with queries on Google, on the Google Cloud platform. And it combines student information systems and learning management systems and all sorts of other teaching and learning vended tools into a single holistic platform that allows a researcher or an institution or even a teacher to be able to understand from a holistic perspective, or at least much more holistic than ever before since the digital transformation of higher education, what's going on in their classes. And this, it's worth saying, is a spectacular resource that I think that we should all be very proud of and that actually exists. I'm not going to say that development is done, case closed, we should all go back home and like hang up our hats, but nevertheless, I think it's a great success of Unizin that this exists. And now that it exists, I want to invite your thoughts on it, and specifically on this idea that data could potentially have some benefit for our ability to understand student learning. I'm going to stop sharing, and on the cEvent platform, you should now see 2 poll questions. And if you could please go ahead and respond to these questions. I'm going to go ahead and display them so that you can actually see them populate. There's one of them. As people start responding, I will close them and then reopen the next one. So let's see there. Thoughts popping in. So the first poll question, if you're not able to see it, or if you're joining us kind of in a way that doesn't allow you to see it, it's a Likert scale of agreement. So strongly agree to strongly disagree. Learning data are valuable for improving student outcomes and success. And we've got responses trickling in that skew heavily toward agreement. I don't know if you're just giving me what I want to hear, but it's true. I believe that learning data are valuable for improving student outcomes and student success. So now that we've got that heavy skew, for the record, it's 97% agree with that statement. I'm going to hide that question, and I'm going to display another question. Oh, people have already responded to it. Holy, this is amazing. Okay, you have a better view of CVent polling than I do. So if you haven't responded to the next question, please do. And just to provide a bookend to this, it looks like there's more like 72% agreement. So we've cut agreement down in terms of our understanding, not of the value of student learning data, but how we can actually put that value into practice. So I'm going to go back to screen sharing now and explore a little bit about that second poll. So share screen. Oh my gosh, and I have animations that are not looking right because I don't have animation set up. But I think I can still talk through this relatively funny looking thing. So first, it's worth saying that this topic of having a clear understanding of how learning data can have a practical impact on student outcomes and success, this is not a new problem for people who are doing research on student learning. So researchers have been working hard on this challenge. In fact, I've got this funny black and white picture of researchers hooking up somebody to a chiometer, I think is what it's called, in the early parts of the 1900s to better understand students' responses to a learning task. So researchers have been worrying about how to take learning data and turn it into practical impact for a long time. And in my work at Indiana University, I've been very dedicated to bringing this laboratory that Unizin has provided, the Unizin Data Platform, to these researchers. I'll highlight two, even though it's kind of hard to see on the background, presentations from the summit that I think are relevant. So today at 2:30 p.m. Central Time, Gwen Gorelski is going to be talking about structured conversations that she's having with faculty about how they could make use of the Unizin Data Platform. And then when we reconvene on Thursday at 4:15 p.m. Central Time, my colleague here, Josh Quick, is going to be leading a panel discussion about institutional efforts to make connections between the UDP and with faculty researchers who could make constructive use of it, not just at Indiana University, but also elsewhere at Nebraska and also at Ohio State. And as evidence for all these things being potentially useful things, I am excited to share with you three particularly awesome researchers. So let me introduce them briefly, and then I'm going to hand the mic to Veronica to get us started to explain a little bit about what she does, and then we'll come back together for some questions and answers. So Dr. Veronica Yan is an assistant professor of educational psychology at the University of Texas, Austin. Previously, she held postdoctoral appointments at USC, University of Southern California, and at UCLA, where she earned her PhD under Robert and Elizabeth Bjork. And at the time, her research examined study sequencing and how learners choose study sequences that turn out to be less effective than the sequences that they might have otherwise chosen. And this research led her to become more interested in self-regulated learning and now toward how learners deal with difficulty, how motivation affects self-regulated learning, and also how mindset interventions can improve these outcomes. And I've got to say, I've followed Veronica for years now, and every time she publishes a new article, I'm even more impressed and somewhat jealous that she's beaten me to it. She's a wonderful researcher. Dr. Elizabeth Canning is assistant professor of psychology at Washington State University. She earned her PhD in social psychology in 2016 from University of Wisconsin-Madison, and then went on to spend 3 years on a postdoctoral appointment here at IU with Mary Murphy. Her research examines motivation in college students and also how to improve it. And if you've read any of her research articles, something you've surely realized right away is that Dr. Canning is an expert interventionist, one of the best I've ever met. Her extensive research on utility value interventions, it's like a magnum opus in how to carefully translate and construct psychological theory in educational settings. And I'm so happy she's here with us today. And then third, we've got Dr. Rod Roscoe. And before I begin introducing Professor Roscoe, I want to give some background. So usually in my research circles, I'm the guy who's trying to advocate for being super sensitive to context, for not drawing over generalizations, for being careful about how you deal with variability. So a few months ago, I'm giving a presentation at Arizona State University, and when we get to Q&A, this guy starts grilling me about context and heterogeneity and variability in brilliant ways I'd never even thought to ask people about, and it was the best dose of my own medicine that I've ever gotten. So that guy was Rod Roscoe, who's associate professor of human systems engineering at Arizona State University. He got his PhD at University of Pittsburgh, and did postdocs both at Vanderbilt and University of Memphis prior to landing at ASU. His research broadly focuses on how students learn processes and also metacognition during the learning process, and how you could use personalized technology to augment and scaffold some of those processes to improve student outcomes. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming our panel, and we'll go ahead and get started by passing the floor to Veronica. So I'm going to stop sharing. Take it away.
All right, can we see my screen? That's good. Thank you, everyone. I'm really excited to be part of this panel, to learn from all of you, to share with the things that I would love for us to be able to do together. I'm going to talk about the counterintuitive science of successful learning, form the backbone of research and why I'm interested. Now, research is me search. That's a pretty common saying. And so I'm going to start here. As a kid, I was a really good student. My friends' parents would ask me to tutor them. My parents' friends would ask me to tutor their kids. I developed superstitions about the strategies that I thought would make learning easy and fluent for me. I, just like about every other student I've taught to since, was convinced that as long as I could find some way of making learning feel easy, then learning would be successful. Now, as a kid, we always ask kids, what do you want to do in the future? What do you want to be? And well, at the time, I actually thought I wanted to be a doctor, because that's a stereotypical Asian parent's dream for their kids, one of the few possible options. But then I thought I didn't want to do all those extra years of medical school. And so for some reason, I chose to do a whole bunch of extra years of graduate school. But as I was pondering this question, what do I want to be? I thought about what else I was really interested in. And the thing that I was really fascinated with was memory. How memory works, what are the ways in which it doesn't work well, and how can we make it better? And I thought, okay, I'm a really good student, so maybe I have something to contribute here. Now, so I joined the Bjork Human Learning and Forgetting Lab as a doctoral student in cognitive psychology at UCLA. And in those first few meetings, I started to notice something really weird. Instead of talking about making learning easy to promote learning and memory, all the conversations I was hearing about at this lab were about making learning more challenging and more effortful. Because it turns out that we're often not very good at knowing what's good for our own learning. So if we look at the empirical literature in psychology, what I've got here is just a selection of 6 different studies. And on the bottom of the x-axis, what we have is different conditions of practice. And on the y-axis, what we're going to show is both what people think, how well people think they're doing, and then how well they actually are doing. So each of these studies, I'm just going to replace these labels with the strategies that they were comparing against, or just a general description of the effect that each study was looking at. Now, in each single one of these studies, we can first look at what people thought was better for their own learning. So on each of these x-axes, as you go from left to right, you have people thinking, oh, this is getting worse and worse for my learning. If we look at the empirical data, however, from these exact same studies, we see that people's intuitions are oftentimes exactly wrong. And so here's the problem with relying just on student intuitions, is that we don't actually know what's good for our own learning a lot of times. Instead, what students do is we make inferences from our subjective experiences, oftentimes thinking things like learning should feel easy, when in fact, that really isn't what we should be doing. Now, one example of such a counterintuitive effect, taken from the middle 2 panels of that previous slide, is this effect called interleaving, or sequencing learning. This is, as been previewed, one of the large bodies of research that I started back in grad school and that I continue to do now. So in Cornell and Bjork 2008, what they did is they had people learn how to recognize learn how to recognize different artist painting styles. And in total, they had people study 12 different artists, and they had people study these artist paintings in one of 2 different ways. Either study one artist at a time. So this is what we refer to as blocked learning, or blocked sequence. This is the type of sequence that we find everywhere in education. If you open up a math textbook and you look at the math practice problems, you'll see everything is blocked one skill at a time. On the other hand, on the opposite end of the spectrum, you could present everything all mixed up, and this is what we call interleaved. Now, in these studies, participants saw half of the artists in a blocked fashion, half the artists in an interleaved fashion, and at the very end, when people were asked, how well do you think you learned? What do you think was better for your own learning? Overwhelmingly, people think that blocking is better than interleaving. That's their subjective experience, that focusing on things one at a time makes learning feel a lot easier. If we look, however, at their ability to now recognize the artist responsible for a new set of paintings, we can see that no contest, the interleave schedule leads to a lot better learning. And this is a counterintuitive effect. People don't seem to recognize this. And this doesn't only just work for very visual concepts, such as artist paintings, but me and my collaborator, Faria Sana, we also conducted a similar study in high school science classrooms back in 2019 before everything shut down. So we luckily got right in there before the COVID. But what we did is we went into 8 different high school science classrooms. So these range from 9th to 12th grade, 9th grade science, or 12th grade biology, chemistry, physics, and so on. And we asked the teachers, okay, tell us what you're going to be teaching your students in this 4-week period. In this month, what are all the concepts you're teaching each week? And every week they identified 6 concepts that their students tended to have difficulty with. And so we said, okay, great, we're going to take half of the concepts from each week. So that's A, B, C here on the left. And we're going to put them on an end of week quiz. So half of the concepts were quizzed, half of the concepts were not. And half of these quizzes, the concept questions were all mixed up, whereas for half of them, they were one at a time, much like you would find in a textbook set of questions. A whole month later, after that final week, 4th week, we then gave students a test across all those concepts that they had learned in the month previous. And on the final test, here's what you see as students' retention. You're seeing essentially 2 whole letter grades difference between the lowest condition, the non-quiz control, and the interleaved quiz. So we're finding massive differences, and the only thing we did is we added 15 minutes of extra quiz time in each class. It was just 15 minutes per week, and you're getting these massive differences in retention. Now, as a side note, we presented these findings to the teachers, and then a month or so later, we went back and we had a few conversations with a couple of them. We asked, are you continuing to do these similar activities afterwards? And not a single person said yes. They all said no. So even though they saw what a difference it made to their students' learning, the main reason that they gave for not continuing to do these quizzes is that they just didn't like how the quizzes made students feel, that they were challenging for students. So why are judgments so inaccurate? When people make judgments about their own students' learning, it's tempting to focus on immediate performance. What helps me get all the questions correct now? What's going to make learning feel easy? So here we have 3 examples of comparisons of different learning strategies, but each one has been replicated many times in different contexts with different levels of learners. The first graph is going to compare retrieval practice versus repeated rereading. The second compares immediate restudying, massing, versus spaced out restudying, spacing. And the third is the blocking versus interleaving that we just saw. Now, on the left side of the grid is how people are doing during that initial practice or immediately after that initial practice. Repeated studying, massing, and blocking can lead to better immediate short-term performance. But on a delayed test, so the results completely flip. So when we talk about examining learning analytics, it's really important to understand the cognitive processes and dynamics of learning and memory. Otherwise, we could walk away with exactly the wrong interpretations of the data. So the first piece of my research is really focused on these cognitive findings. What are these mechanisms that underlie learning? What are these desirably difficult strategies for long-term learning and their boundary conditions? Thinking of like, what are the contexts? For whom do they work? When do they work? Why do they work? And at the same time, layered on top of that are these big metacognitive findings that learners and instructors alike often fail to appreciate the strategies that benefit long-term learning because they're subjective experiences, and sometimes the immediate data can be misleading. And so the next part of my research is really, what are the beliefs and mindsets that shape how we interpret our metacognitive experiences? So if we think about this idea of difficulty in learning, there's an optimal level of difficulty that we need to be challenging ourselves, be in a position where we're able to construct and build upon our learning in ways that aren't just spoon-fed to us, because then we won't retain it very well. But if we think about what motivates learners, then we know that there's also a similar curve there, that there's a peak of difficulty at which we're most motivated. Too easy and it's boring, too hard, and we think it's difficult, it's impossible, I'm going to give up. The problem really comes, however, when the peak of that motivation curve comes at a lower difficulty level than that peak of that learning curve. And that can happen when we're holding these unproductive beliefs, such as learning should be easy. So here's just an empirical, some data showing that these beliefs matter not just within students, but among teachers too. So in a survey of 455 high school and college instructors, what I found is the more that they endorse this idea that difficulty means that it's impossible for me or impossible for my students, the more likely they are actually to subscribe to learning myths and misconceptions. And so we really want to be doing, and this is where the next part of my work is really focused on, is how do we shift people to taking on more productive beliefs? So rather than thinking learning should be easy, maybe we should be thinking easy come, easy go. How do we make learning more challenging? And so that's really the intersection of my work, focusing on cognition, metacognition, and the motivational mindsets that form a lens through which we make those judgments. And at every single segment of this, we can think about context effects, individual differences, cultural differences, and so on. Thank you very much.
Elizabeth, how's it going?
Yeah, were you doing questions now or at the
No,
very
no,
end?
I was thinking we would hold
Okay.
them for after. Yeah, sorry, I should have told you that ahead of time.
No, that's fine. Okay, I'll get my screen up here. All right, how does
I
that
will
look?
add while I got a break here. If anybody has questions they'd like to add in the chat, please do. I can pass them along to our presenters. So yeah, I welcome it in the meantime.
All right, are my slides up or they look good? All right,
They look great. Yep.
let's get started then. Whoops. Okay. Hi, I'm Elizabeth Canning, and just a little bit about me. I am a social psychologist, so I'm very interested in how our contexts shape us, how they shape our motivation. Today, I'm going to be talking about some interventions. So as Ben said in his introduction, I'm really interested in how we can intervene and change things. And so that's what I'm going to be talking about today. So my research is really interested in social disparities in college. So even today, whoops, I lost my mouse here. Hold on, there we go. A college education is still considered one of the best forms of social mobility in the United States. Yet there are very large disparities in higher education that make college more difficult for certain groups. So for example, people who are excluded due to their race, ethnicity tend to earn lower grades and drop out at higher rates in higher education. Another group are first generation college students. And this group of students, only about 40% of them end up graduating college at all, compared to continuing generation college students, where about 70% of them graduate college. So again, these large disparities for certain groups. Another group I'm interested in is women in science fields. So although women now outperform men in college, In particular fields like science, technology, engineering, and math, their performance is undermined relative to their potential, which leads them to drop out of these more higher paying or prestigious fields. So my research is interested in understanding, why do these gaps exist, and then what can we do about them? So we know that it's complex, right? These gaps are multiply determined. There are economic factors at play, structural factors at play, and of course, social factors at play. I take a lens of the social psychological factors. So it may be that these gaps are widened or exacerbated by social psychological factors. So this is the extent that these students may feel less engaged or less interested, less motivated. If they're worrying about whether they belong in this context, or if they're worrying about confirming negative stereotypes about their group. Now, as instructors and researchers, we have a prime opportunity here to intervene and counteract these negative social psychological factors. So let me give you a quick example. So imagine you are a student in a large introductory biology class. Maybe it's your first year on campus. This is your first big college exam that you've taken. You get your first exam score back, and maybe you didn't do as well as you had hoped or as you thought you would. So you're asking yourself, what does this grade mean? What is the meaning of this? Does it mean I can't do this? Maybe biology isn't for me, or people like me. The grade you get on that exam carries a lot of weight about yourself, about your potential and what that means. However, another perspective might be, I didn't use the right strategies, so maybe I should ask for help before the next exam. It's not that I don't have the ability to do well, it's that I didn't use the right strategies or prepare in the right way. Now, I argue that we can design interventions to provide this meaning and redirect students to interpret these performance feedback that they get in a way that's less threatening, in a way that can increase engagement, and then ultimately can affect their success in college. So today I'm going to focus on one particular motivational theory, and this is mindset beliefs. I'm going to talk about instructor mindset beliefs, the messages that instructors give to their students about the nature of ability and how that might influence their motivation and success. So this work is grounded in mindset theory, Carol Dweck's mindset theory, where people hold different mindsets or beliefs about human traits, such as intelligence or ability. And it kind of breaks down into two different ends of a continuum. So people who endorse more of a fixed mindset believe that abilities are fixed and can't be changed. So you either have what it takes to be successful in that area or you don't. People who endorse more of a growth mindset believe that abilities are malleable and can improve with effort, learning, and specific strategies. Now, most of the research on growth mindset for the past few decades has focused exclusively on students. So how do students' beliefs about their own ability impact their own outcomes? So how can students' personal beliefs impact their own motivation? Now, this work is extremely important. There's been a lot of work on it. However, it focuses solely on the students, and it puts the burden on them and ignores the contextual cues in the classroom. So an instructor might think, well, they did poor on that exam because they just didn't have the right mindset. But when you consider mindset as a cue in the environment, from a social psychological perspective, you have to look at other messages in that environment. And one of the ones and who in that setting can be creating the norms. Okay, so shifting who we're focusing on and how their motivational beliefs impact students. How do the mindset cues from an instructor influence the motivation of students? Now, when faculty or instructors believe something, particularly if they have strong beliefs about it, students are going to pick up on it. So they're very adept at understanding the messages that they're getting, even subtle messages. And when faculty believe something, it can have drastic consequences for everybody in that room, particularly for people who are from stigmatized groups. So we wanted to look at this, phenomenon. What we did is we surveyed faculty about their mindset beliefs, and then we obtained course grades from every single student that these faculty members taught over 7 semesters. So we got some institutional data, and what we did is we connected it to their mindset beliefs that the faculty told us on this survey. So this included over 600 science courses and over 15,000 undergraduate students in this sample. And so we wanted to look at this correlation. What we found is that students who were stigmatized, underrepresented minority students, those are the red bars here, performed more poorly in these courses when their instructor endorsed more of a fixed mindset about abilities. So here the blue bars are representing the majority group in this setting, white and Asian students. The red bars are the minority students. These are Black, Hispanic, Native American students in this context. And what you can see here is the racial achievement gap. So minority students are performing more poorly in these classes overall compared to the majority group. But what's really interesting here, though, is that the size of this gap depends on whether the instructor endorsed more of a fixed mindset or more of a growth mindset. So the achievement gap is twice as large in the fixed, or whenever the instructor had a fixed mindset compared to when they had more of a growth mindset. Now, this work is correlational, but it suggests that this might be a ripe opportunity to intervene and change things. So next, we wanted to see, is there a way that we could intervene and focus mindset messages at a critical time in the semester that might lead students to engage with the course differently and ultimately impact their performance? So we went into a large introductory biology course that had over 400 students in it. In this context, the largest achievement gap is with first-generation college students. So this is the group that we're most interested in helping in this course. And in this study, what we really wanted to focus on the engagement piece. So what are students doing? How can we observe their behavior in data? So we picked critical times in the semester where we thought these messages might have the greatest impact. So thinking back to that example that I gave at the beginning, when students get their grades back after these high stakes exams, it's this key opportunity or this key time of uncertainty. What does this mean? What does this grade mean about my ability to succeed? So what we did is at the beginning of the semester, we randomized students to a control condition or this growth mindset condition from instructors. And then after each exam, all students received an email from their instructor with either this control message or a growth mindset message. Then we collected their grades at the end of the semester. And then we also pulled the data that was available to us from their course LMS. So in this case, it was Blackboard. So we pulled Blackboard data to see how often students were engaging with the course material. So here's a little excerpt from one of the emails that we sent from the instructor. It says, regardless of how well you did on this exam, I believe that everybody can improve their skills, learn from their mistakes, be successful. You don't need to be smart to perform at a high level. You can do these other things to get the score that you want. So we infused these emails with a growth mindset. In the control condition, they just got some standard information about here's your grade, here's how to find it on Blackboard. So we wanted to look at, did this intervention have an impact on their course GPA? So on the left here, I'm showing you the control condition, and this is the difference in grades between continuing generation college students, that's the blue bar, and the first generation college students, that's the green bar. And what you can see is that continuing generation students significantly outperform first generation students in this class. They earn about 1/3 of a letter grade higher in the course on average. However, in the growth mindset condition, after receiving these targeted emails from the instructor about how to interpret their grade in the course, we see this gap completely go away. So now continuing generation students and first generation students are performing equally well in this class. So we were super excited about this finding, and we wanted to dig into it a little bit more to see if we could see sort of how students are behaving in the course. And so that's where this Blackboard data came in. And here what we found is a main effective condition. So when the instructor communicated this growth mindset, students were accessing the course materials on Blackboard about 40 times or 40 instances more on average. So in the control condition, they're accessing course materials about 330 times throughout the semester. And that increased about 12% in the growth mindset condition. So essentially what we're seeing is that they're engaging with the course material at a higher level, or at least more frequently, when we're giving them these messages about how to interpret their grades. Okay. And what this ends up doing is we did something. So we did an intervention, which then increased their engagement or their behavior on the course website, which then led to their higher achievement in the class. So a very general conclusion from some snippets of this research is that instructors and researchers have the opportunity to create meaning for their students by being intentional about the messages that they send. And this could potentially narrow performance gaps that we see in these high stakes courses like STEM fields. I want to thank all of the collaborators on this project. It takes a lot of people to do intervention work. And so I want to acknowledge them here. And thank you.
All right, can everyone see my slides? Thank you. So I have the honor of going last in this sequence, which is great because I get to try to riff on some things others have discussed. This wasn't what we planned, but there's some ideas that have been mentioned in the previous two panelists that I want to make sure that I mention. So I'm Rod Roscoe. I'm really happy to be here, and I'm going to talk about sort of journeys today and how there are many ways to get there. And you see some images on the side pertaining to writing, which is relevant to one of my focus areas. So we've already heard a little bit about me and my interests, one of which is writing. As I said, will be relevant in a few seconds. I like to think of myself as an advocate for diversity, inclusion, equity, belonging, and justice, which makes me very interested in journeys, how people navigate through particularly educational spaces. And this is an interest I share with the folks at Unizin. There's a great paper in Inside Higher Ed by Kathy and colleagues that talk about how we think of data and how we use it in particular relation to how students' journeys, or how we can use data to understand those journeys to help them succeed. I've been fortunate to be able to write about some of these same issues in other venues. So for example, we have a book linking my field of human systems engineering to the pursuit of diversity, inclusion, and social justice. And recently I was able to write and speak about representation and belonging and imposter syndrome and such things in STEM. Also, again, focusing on this idea of journeys. So let me dive into an example from, like I said, my field of writing. And we know that writing is very important. It shouldn't be a surprise that school, employment, business, marketing, even military depends on quality communication. And so driving this is the importance of valid writing assessment, to know how people are doing, to communicate to people about how they are doing, and to improve our teaching, or teaching students how to improve. So in order to do this, we need to assess writing. And you can do this by, for example, like we want to predict holistic writing quality. How good is the essay? And it might go from, not so good to really, really great. And we can plot those dots. So we can imagine there's variance in those essays that range from not so good to really good. But we also know that writing is not a single dimension of just goodness. There's a lot of dimensions that influence that, like vocabulary or organization. And there are a lot of factors that influence writing success that aren't necessarily writing, but are important. Like, what do you know about the topic? And are you motivated to write about it? And so we can complicate this analysis by adding these extra dimensions, and we can have lots of predictors and coefficients, and we get a slightly more nuanced picture of how students are doing, or what the quality of these essays. And as we have gained more tools, for example, natural language processing tools, we can add more predictors. We can really dive into these nuances, and that increases our accuracy. And hooray for machine learning, for giving us the ability to confront these data without any fear, because we can handle the nonlinearity and contextualization and so on. But you still might imagine this mindset implies a sort of recipe for writing, that it's just understanding the ingredients leads us to goodness or badness in writing. Well, we challenged this notion a little bit. This paper is now from 2014, so a while ago. But Scott Crossley, myself, and Danielle McNamara were interested in how students actually write well. So we used a variety of tools and analyses looking at only high-scoring essays. So these are the essays that have been flagged as 5s and 6s on a 6-point scale. These are the best essays. And what we found is that they did not all write the same. In fact, some writers achieved this success by being very descriptive. Others were very sort of academic and complex in their style. Some writers focused on being very accessible and cohesive, and others were really skilled at using their vocabulary in a sort of a familiar way. So within a very small corpus of essays, only 1,600, we found 4 different ways that students were successful. So if we come back to this already complicated picture of writers and writing, we can make it more complicated by thinking about there are not just sort of one way to write well that's complicated, but there are different ways to write well, different students or different approaches. So there are multiple ways to write well, or many ways to get there, going back to the title of this presentation. And you can think about this in terms of your favorite authors. Like, who do you like to read? Some people are really good at world building, and some people are really good at communicating complicated ideas with precision. So again, there's many ways to be a good writer. And I think this mindset, this approach, deepens our understanding of who is a good writer or who is not a good writer and how they write, which then empowers us to personalize or focus on their assets in the formative feedback that we give them. Just recently, we got a grant to study inclusive language analytics. So doing some of the same kind of work, but with much larger data sets and thinking about the inter and intracategorical variance in writing samples and writers, and then using that to reflect on potential biases in how we assess writing. And this is with my 2 postdocs, Dr. Maria Goldstein and Dr. Amin Alshin. So the idea of there's many ways to get there, this mindset, I think, can apply to students and learning more broadly. So I've been talking about writing, but what I'm talking about isn't only true of writing. There are a lot of student outcomes that we might care about, and we just heard about a few of them a few minutes ago, like GPA, employment or salary, or maybe we want to predict alumni engagement, who's going to give big donations after they graduate. And we can take the same approach. We have GPA, it can be low, it can be high. We know there are many factors that describe students that impact their learning experience. Again, we just heard about a few of those. And we know there are influences on learning, for example, like students' beliefs about what learning entails. And we can plot these. We can plot all the sort of coefficients, and again, have a fairly nuanced predictor of who's going to get a high GPA or not. But the key point I want to get across is that these students are on different journeys. That some students, if you plot all these variables, they might succeed because they have a ton of resources, so-called, quote, privileged. They use those resources and they do well. But we also know that there are students who have all the same resources, but yet don't do well. Maybe because their goals aren't aligned to their current plans and they're, quote, unmotivated. We have some students who don't have resources, but still do extremely well, maybe through persistence and staying up late, sort of the grit mindset. And again, we have students who have all the motivation in the world, but also encounter obstacles that just don't care, like chronic illness. Chronic illness doesn't care how motivated you are. So the point here is that students are on different journeys. And so these variables, these data points, these coefficients don't mean the same thing to every student. They don't all predict at the same way or the same level. They're not all equally salient. So this might lead us to a mindset, and both of our previous speakers mentioned mindset, so this is great, of what I consider journey-driven data analytics. I just made that up. That instead of sort of thinking about data or data analytics as reducing people to numbers, instead, we think of using these data, these numbers, to understand people's journeys. Where have they been? Where are they now? And where are they going? And I think that this is really something that's enabled and empowered by just the wealth of data that Unizin and the data platform makes available, as long as we think to approach the data in this way. So if we come back to our student dots, we recognize that these students are different people with different backgrounds, different trajectories, that their paths in life have led them to where they are. And we can understand that through data. And then maybe the next step is using an understanding of these data, these journeys, to really achieve that goal that Kathy and others mentioned in that Inside Higher Ed paper, to propel students upwards and onwards from college and beyond. So that's sort of a mindset shift that I would like to add to this conversation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rod. And it's going to be kind of silent for me clapping, but I feel like I should clap anyway because this is wonderful. So thank you so much for your contributions here. There have been a few questions in the chat that I've tried to pipe in people's responses to from our panelists here, but I want to start a little discussion here in the remaining time by asking a question about data access, because this is something that I think that a lot of the attendees here who are involved with Unizin might be curious about. So you've each conducted research, spectacular research by my view, on students' behaviors and performance and the artifacts that they've submitted in real classroom contexts. I was wondering if you could describe some of the challenges you might have experienced in gaining access to these data. I think I want to start with Elizabeth. Yeah, she's already nodding, so I feel like she'll be a good place to start.
Sure. Yeah, I think one of the challenges with accessing data is that you kind of have to know the systems ahead of time to know which questions to ask. And so, it's finding out, where is the data house, who is the keeper of the data, and how do you know who that person is? If you're trying to merge different pieces of data across a system, that generally, includes housing the data in different departments and different people keeping them, and then linking them together is a huge challenge. On the research side, the IRB is a challenge as well. So, getting data that maybe students haven't consented to give ahead of time can also be a challenge. And so a lot of that groundwork, or laying that groundwork, takes a lot of time. And so if you don't know ahead of time, where to go and who to ask, then it can slow down the project quite a bit.
I'll just add on to that in terms of merging the data that is housed in all sorts of different groups or databases. The other nightmare that I've had is that they've not had the same identifiers. So sometimes professor names will be with hyphens or without hyphens, or the course numbers for some reason are different. Everything, when they're different, it's just it's a massive headache. The other thing that I want to say is that with my research, there's also certain pieces of data I've never had access to. So things like the Canvas analytics. I can go into my Canvas account. I can see the like login times and click stream of each student individually, but there's no way to actually export that, and no one will give me access to that either.
Yeah, I agree with the challenge of understanding the data systems and structure, and it's not articulated the same across different organizations or different instances, and that makes it really challenging. The only thing I would add onto it is like the importance and challenge of building relationships. That people have data, but getting access to it, they want to trust you with the data. They don't want to say, here is 30,000 essays written by our students, if they don't know you're going to use them, fairly and well. And building those relationships takes a long time. And I think that's exciting about this sort of consortium approach, is that those relationships are already in place, and it makes it a lot easier to build that trust and solve the articulation issues that allow us to just access the data.
This is super helpful. I want to kind of send it back to you, Rod, with a follow-up. So one of the things that Unizin has, I mean, you could go to it, like there's a website that has the data dictionary of the UCDM and also its implementation on the Google Cloud platform. So all the specs, like if you had maybe like 6 hours of free time, you could go and learn all about it. But clearly that's a little bit impractical considering that you also have a research program and you have classes to teach and stuff. So I'm wondering if you could tell a little bit more about how you envision meeting halfway, or like people from IT maybe reaching out to you for involvement, under the assumption that it's impractical to expect you to invest tons of time, perhaps in learning a bunch of specs and digging into dictionaries. I don't know.
Well, I'll say that, I mean, in academia, at least, we have very poor concepts of time and what we will say yes to. I think a huge amount of power is just knowing that these things exist. Because if you don't even know the data are out there, you can't know to ask for it. You can't know to formulate those questions. So you shared the anecdote earlier about me grilling you in your previous presentation. Hopefully I wasn't too mean, but seeing your research in your platform and seeing the kind of data that you had access to, for me, was also eye-opening. I'm like, oh, okay, I didn't know this was out there. I didn't know this was possible. And now I can start imagining those questions. So just like the summit and the conversations we've had are a huge step forward in just letting people know what's out there and what's possible. And then I do think knowing who to reach out to ask what else, and also like putting yourself out there, sort of saying, I'm interested in these data. If you have something, come to me. So being available. So someone has to reach out and you have to know who to reach out to. And I think so there's a lot of awareness raising that happens, but then the rest falls into place. So like, I definitely know I want to collaborate with everyone else here now that we all have met.
You can go for it, Elizabeth. Yeah.
Oh, I was just going to add another challenge after you know that the data exists is then getting it in the correct format for the project that you're interested in. So, you know, looking at Blackboard data, for instance, you can get all kinds of data from Blackboard, but it's maybe not in the right format that you need to do whatever analysis that you want. And so, you know, knowing when somebody clicks on something at a certain time on a certain day can be important for some projects, but maybe not so important for other projects. And so, you know, getting it in a format that you can analyze easily and not spend hours and hours and hours putting it in the right format would also be really helpful in navigating those challenges.
So unfortunately, we've got way more questions in chat that we could possibly tackle in the next like minute and a half. But there is one way that I think I might sum it up, and I'm curious in your quick hit on it, even though it's not necessarily a quick question. So we can all agree, and I think everybody in the room can also agree, that higher education is a complex process. Like it's a complicated system, but it's easy to be attracted to simple solutions and like group level differences and overgeneralization. So there were a few questions about variability. And I was wondering if you could like briefly tackle how you in your own research deal with diversity and heterogeneity in natural education settings, how you imagine this is something that might be important when we're talking about improving student success. Veronica, do you want to take a stab?
Yes, I want to say variability is like the gift for researchers. Like variability is what we study, right? So I don't think it's something we have to deal with. I think it actually drives the research questions that we have. And you know, all of us have looked at variability in different ways. And the different like lenses through which we each see variability, I think collectively it really paints that much better picture to understand learning as well as what we can do to improve it.
That's a pretty strong answer. Okay, so I've just received a word that the CEvent is having a company-wide outage, so the attendee hub might be experiencing difficulties, but we've got people working on it, and I want to hand it over to Kathy O'Brien for some brief announcements that might have otherwise appeared in CEvent. So thank you so much.
First, I want to thank everybody, and I hope that you could all hear this. Veronica, Rod, Elizabeth, and of course, Ben, thank you for sharing your expertise and for participating today. I do want to get your attention, the remaining audience. Let me say iPad mini, Yeti cooler, and Ember mug. And now that I have your attention, I want to know that through CEvent, by attending things like sponsor speed dating, all of the sessions in the Unizin Summit, going to the exhibit hall, we're giving away prizes this year. Get your points. That's it. Enjoy the summit. Thank you.